It was on the cold night of January 27, 1856, that the infamous Margaret Garner escape took place. And that was a Sunday night, so she would have attended church at Richwood Presbyterian Church that day, and she was actually pregnant at the time of her escape. Margaret and her 4 children were enslaved by Archibald Gaines, and they would meet up with her husband Robert and his parents Simon and Mary, who were enslaved by James Marshall, a neighbor to the Gaineses. 9 slaves from nearby farms accompanied the Garners. They took a horse-drawn sled 16 miles down ice-covered roads to get to the Ohio River. And because it was a particularly cold winter, they were actually able to cross by foot as the Ohio River was completely frozen. But it was daylight by the time they made it across, and it would have been suspicious for 17 African Americans to walk the streets of Cincinnati all in one big group. So they split up, and the 9 friends actually made it on to Allies with the Underground Railroad and on to freedom in Canada. The Garners would suffer a much less fortunate fate. They asked for directions several times before they found the home of Margaret Garner's free cousin, Elijah Kite. After a quick greeting, Elijah visited Levi Coffin's store. Levi Coffin was the unofficial president of the Underground Railroad. And he stopped at the store because he needed directions to the next stop on the Underground Railroad. He hurried home to move the Garners along, and shortly after he arrived, he found his house surrounded by Archibald Gaines, James Marshall, and a force of U.S. Marshals. We're not quite sure who betrayed the Garners. It may have been one of the people they asked for directions. Robert would later claim in an 1870 interview that Elijah betrayed them, but we don't really know. In the cabin, the Garners and the Kites barred the doors and windows. Robert fired 2 shots from a revolver, which kept the aggressors at bay for a short while. Perhaps realizing that their efforts were futile, Margaret grabbed a butcher knife and turned on her children. She nearly decapitated her 3-year-old daughter. The 2 Garner men then panicked. They screamed and ran around the room in terror. Margaret calmly turned to her mother-in-law and said, "Mother, help me kill the children." And her mother-in-law then began to cry and hid under the bed. It wasn't until Elijah Kite's wife finally wrestled the knife from her that she was subdued. Margaret sobbed that she would rather kill every one of her children than have them returned to slavery. The aggressors then began to use a log as a battering ram and knocked down the front door.